Do you ever wonder how you could buy a shirt for as little as $5 or even like a pack of socks for two? And do you ever wonder like what the working conditions are like in the factories where these items are made? Um, well, many fashion companies compete with the factories that they outsource to get like the cheapest production costs. And so this is how we're able to get clothing for this cheap. Um, but what we aren't able to see is like what the conditions are like in these factories. Um, in these developing countries where we outsource our production to, there aren't as many rules and regulations that protect workers' rights as there are here. And this affects how the factories treat their workers, ultimately. So since I am going into the fashion industry, I have taken a few classes that cover this topic, or at least we talk about it a little bit. And like in these classes we do reports and stuff that cover this info, so I mean, I know what I'm talking about, sort of. So majority of these products produced in different countries, they have poor working conditions, and this results in low prices for you, but it also, like, it hurts the workers negatively, and that is what I'm going to talk about in my three main points, which include the working conditions of these factory workers, their labor rights, and the living and the wages that they make to live off. So going into working conditions, many of these factories, they're located in like the poorest regions of the world, so they're not always built the best to begin with. But the thing that we also have to keep in mind is that garment production in these countries, such as like Bangladesh and Cambodia, it can make up to 90% of like the income that the country receives. So if we were just to shut down everything, like they wouldn't be making any money. They would have like no income. And also, since they do not build these factories like up to code or anything, there have been numerous reports of like fires and factory collapses, such as the one that happened in Rana Plaza last year. And with these fires, they injure and kill thousands of workers like almost every time they happen. So from CNN, I found an article that was talking about the Rana Plaza factory collapse last year, which happened in Dhaka, Bangladesh. It killed over 1,000 people, and this happened because the building structure had not been kept up, and they hadn't done any inspections to like make sure that the building structure was safe and sound, and to find these issues that caused the factory collapse. This has happened, like, this is why these factory collapses happen, because nobody inspects them. So then I found an article from The Guardian that was talking about ways to improve that. So the Bangladesh Accord was signed by over 150 companies, and in this it pledged to check and rectify safety measures in the over 1,000 Bangladesh garment factories, and they wanted this done by October of like this year, so in a couple months. However, currently reports show that this hasn't been implemented to what it should have been, and so like these thousands of factories are not being inspected, so they're still not up to code or anything. And then with that, I'm going to go into labor rights. So many workers, they work long days, a lot of overtime. Like some have even said that they work up to like 89 hours a week. That's like 2 work weeks here if you're full time. And along with that, like workers want rights. They want to form unions, but many countries do not allow the formation of unions. And with that, it causes stirs and stuff. But there are, because of these factory collapses, there are countries that are passing laws for unions to be formed. And then from the Human Rights Workers website, I found that some workers in these countries where they can form unions, they've claimed that the factory managers, they will intimidate them and mistreat the employees that are involved with unions or attempt to form unions, and this can even include like death threats. So unions are not actually really useful for them. I mean, they're useful, but like they aren't really helping anything when the factory managers like mistreat them. Also, child labor is still used in many of these developing countries, even though there are laws in place to prevent child labor. Also, from the Guardian, I found that there is a law in Bangladesh that states that minors, or well, anyone under 18, cannot work more than 5 hours a day. Yet they were reporting that there were minors that were forced to work up to 11-hour days, which is double what they are allowed to work. So this isn't being used effectively, and if there were these factory inspections, then they would see that and kind of like shut it down or try and fix it. Along with these poor working conditions and lots of overtime, it results in very low wages, and in many of these countries, the minimum wages are too low for workers to support their families, which could include like their grandparents, their children, like their brothers, like their entire extended family. So basically this is like almost in every developing country. The main ones we know about are Bangladesh, India, and Cambodia because they do have some of the lowest minimum wages. On Bloomberg, I found that since these workers have been going on strikes, they shut down like 400 factories because of the strike, and the Bangladesh government passed a law to raise the minimum wage to $68 a month, and that went into effect last December. But it's still below the living wage to support a family because the cost of living is steadily rising, so it's harder for these factory workers to support their family on these low wages. So this is not all the issues that go into labor issues and overseas production, but these are the major issues because they get put into the spotlight, and it is what the media focuses on just because like lives are lost and like these people aren't living a good life. So there are harsh working conditions, buildings are not like kept up securely, and codes are not upheld or inspected. So there are factory collapses, and then the workers in these buildings are forced to work long hours, and they can even be punished or killed for joining unions. They have minors working long hours that are against laws in some of these countries, and they're working so they can make money to support their families, yet they're not even making enough money to get by, especially when the cost of living keeps rising. Though recently, because of all the social stirs, many companies have been put under the spotlight for choosing to produce in these companies, and they're kind of being held accountable to sort of like help out with the workers in these factories and make sure that they aren't like being treated as unfairly as they are. So what you can do is just become more aware of where your clothing is made, and maybe try and look into where some of your favorite brands like choose to source their production to.